The drive to my grandmother's birthday dinner took me 23 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way. The way you do when something feels off but you can't name it yet. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old that April, the owner of a small architectural design studio I had spent 4 years building from a folding table in my spare bedroom into something that paid 6 people's salaries and had just landed its first commercial contract. I had dressed carefully that evening. Dark blazer, the good earrings. I was bringing a cake from the bakery my grandmother had loved since before I was born. The text from my brother arrived while I was stopped at a red light 2 blocks from the restaurant. Marcus, his name at the top of the screen. The message underneath short and clipped, the way his messages always were when he had already decided something. Grandma isn't feeling well. Dinner is off. Don't bother coming. I read it twice. Then I looked up at the green light and kept driving. Because the restaurant was 2 blocks away, and I had the cake on the passenger seat, and something in me had stopped believing Marcus a long time before that evening. The parking lot was fuller than it should have been for a canceled dinner. I recognized my aunt's silver sedan in the second row. I recognized my cousin's truck near the entrance. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine running and understood, in the quiet and practical way you understand things you have been slowly preparing yourself for, that I had not been uninvited because my grandmother was unwell. I had been uninvited because someone had decided, again, that the evening would be easier without me there. I took the cake off the passenger seat and walked in anyway. The private dining room was at the back, past the bar, behind a set of frosted glass doors. I could hear them before I reached it. My grandmother's laugh, high and warm. My aunt saying something about a toast. And then Marcus, his voice carrying the particular ease of someone who has just been told good news, saying that this was exactly how it was supposed to be. Family taking care of family, no outside complications. I had my hand on the door when my phone buzzed. A text from Donna, my studio's head of accounts, the woman who had been with me since the 2nd month of operation, and who had the professional instincts of someone twice her age. It said only, "Call me before you go in anywhere tonight." I know that sounds strange. Please just call me first. I stepped back from the frosted glass doors and found a quiet corner near the coat check and called her. What Donna told me in the next 11 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about the previous 8 months. She had been reconciling the quarterly vendor payments that afternoon. A routine process she ran at the end of every billing cycle. She had noticed 2 invoices from a materials supplier called Brightline Structural Solutions that she did not recognize, each for just under $4,000. Both authorized with my electronic signature. She had pulled the vendor file. Brightline Structural Solutions had no verifiable address, no business license on record in any state database she could access, and no footprint of any kind except for 2 wire transfers out of my studio's operating account. She had then gone back further. There were 3 more vendors she couldn't verify, payments going back 7 months, all bearing my signature. All approved through a secondary authorization channel she had not set up and did not recognize. The total, she told me carefully, was not catastrophic on its own, but it was not small either, and she had found, at the end of the wire transfer chain, a personal savings account. She had not been able to confirm whose account it was, but she had confirmed that it was not mine. I stood near the coat check in my good earrings with the birthday cake in my hand and did not go into the private dining room. I drove home. I put the cake on my kitchen counter and sat at my desk and opened my studio's accounting platform, and I started reading. Donna had sent me everything she had flagged, organized already into a clear file the way she always did things, without drama and without gaps. I read for 2 hours. By midnight I understood the shape of it, even if I did not yet have every detail confirmed. Someone had created vendor accounts in my system using my credentials. Someone who had access to my login. Someone who knew the approval workflow well enough to route payments through a secondary channel that would not flag in a standard review. The money had moved out of my operating account in amounts small enough individually to avoid automatic alerts. Cumulatively, over 7 months it was $31,000. I thought about who had access to my credentials. I had given my login to 2 people during a system migration 8 months ago, when I'd been traveling for a site visit and needed someone to process an urgent payment remotely. I had given it to Marcus because he was family and he was there. And I had given it to my cousin Bree because she had been helping me with administrative work that quarter while my regular assistant was on leave. Marcus, who had just told me not to come to dinner. Marcus, whose personal finances I knew, in the vague way you know things about people you grew up with, had been strained since his business partnership dissolved 18 months ago. Marcus, who had been present at my office twice in the past year for what he had described as casual visits, both times when I was not there. I did not call him that night. I called Donna instead and told her to freeze all secondary authorization channels immediately and to change every access credential in the system by morning. Then I called the one person I trusted to help me understand what I was actually looking at. Her name was Patricia. She was a forensic accountant who had done contract work for a firm I partnered with the previous year, and she was the kind of person who approached financial irregularities the way a surgeon approaches a procedure, methodically, without emotion. Focused entirely on the accurate picture. I texted her at midnight and she responded within 10 minutes because that is the kind of professional she is. We had a call scheduled for 7 the next morning. Patricia spent 3 days on it. She traced every transaction, mapped the vendor account creation dates against system access logs, cross-referenced the IP addresses used to authorize payments against my studio's login records. The picture that emerged was clean and complete and exactly as damaging as I had feared. The fictitious vendor accounts had been created from 2 IP addresses. One was my office's building network, accessed after hours on 3 occasions. The other was a residential address registered to Marcus. The authorization pattern showed payments clustered around the periods when I was traveling for site visits, which Marcus would have known about because I shared my calendar with family the way you do when you are still operating on the assumption that people are trustworthy. Bree's access had been used once, for a single payment early in the pattern, in a way Patricia described as consistent with someone who had been given access but used it less systematically, possibly without full understanding of what was being constructed. The money, once it cleared my operating account, had moved through 2 intermediate transfers before landing in an account Patricia identified as belonging to a holding company registered in Marcus's name 6 months prior. From there, based on the timing, it had been used to service a personal loan Marcus had taken against his dissolved business partnership. I sat with this for 48 hours. Not out of indecision. Out of a need to feel the full weight of it before I decided what to do with it. Because I had learned a long time ago that decisions made before you have processed the grief underneath them tend to be the wrong decisions. Marcus was my brother. We had grown up in the same house. He had helped me move into my first apartment and driven me to the emergency room once when I was 24 and had been, for most of my life before this, someone I would have described without hesitation as a person who cared about me. I understood, sitting in my kitchen with Patricia's documentation laid out on my table, that he had looked at what I had built and decided that my resources were available to him in a way that mine were not available to myself. I do not know if he framed it to himself as borrowing. I do not know if he told himself I would never notice or never care. What I know is that he had taken $31,000 from a business I had built without help from anyone in my family, and he had done it carefully, over time, in a way designed to avoid detection. That knowledge changed the texture of everything I remembered. The casual visits to my office. The questions about my billing system, framed as interest. The dinner I had not been invited to, where the family was gathering without me, where Marcus had been the one to send the text telling me not to come. I called my grandmother the following afternoon. Not to tell her anything yet. Just to hear her voice and to confirm, indirectly, that she was perfectly fine and had been looking forward to seeing me at dinner before Marcus had told her I had a prior commitment. She did not know I had been told not to come. She thought I had canceled. I kept my voice even through that conversation and I told her I would make it up to her and I meant it. 3 days after Patricia delivered her final report, Marcus called me. He said he had been thinking about my studio and about the direction I was taking it, and he had a business proposition he wanted to walk me through. He had identified, he said, a development opportunity. A mixed-use project in the north part of the city. He needed a design partner to make it credible. He thought we could build something together as a family. He said the words "as a family" twice in 4 minutes. I told him it sounded interesting. I told him I would need to see the details and that he should bring everything to the quarterly client appreciation event I hosted at my studio every spring. It was coming up in 2 weeks. I told him I would set aside time specifically for him and that I would make sure the right people were in the room. His voice, by the end of the call, had the warmth of someone who believes they have just solved a problem they were worried about. I spent those 2 weeks preparing two things simultaneously. The first was the event itself, which I ran every year as a genuine expression of appreciation for the clients and contractors who had made my studio's growth possible. The second was a clean, clearly labeled presentation of Patricia's documentation, organized so that anyone with basic financial literacy could follow the chain from my operating account to Marcus's holding company in under 5 minutes. I also called Bree, not to confront her, but because I had known Bree her entire life and I believed, based on everything Patricia had shown me, that her involvement had been more naive than intentional. I told her I knew about the payment. I told her I was not going to treat her the same way I was going to treat Marcus, but that I needed her to understand clearly what had been done with her help, even if she had not understood it at the time. There was a long silence on the phone. Then she said she was sorry in a voice that told me she had known something was wrong and had told herself not to look at it too closely. I told her I heard that. I told her she would need to make her own decisions about her relationship with Marcus going forward. That was the last thing I said to her about it. The evening of the client event, my studio was full by 7 contractors, commercial clients, 2 city planning contacts, the firm partners I was in conversation with about a joint project, Donna and 2 members of my design team. The room had the comfortable energy of people who had worked together and respected each other's work. I had catering and good wine, and the spring portfolio displayed on the gallery wall. Marcus arrived at 7:30 with Bree beside him. Both of them dressed in the particular way people dress when they want to appear successful in a room full of people who actually are. He had a folder under his arm. He shook hands with people he had just met and introduced himself as my brother, with an ease that made clear he understood that association with me, in this room, carried weight. He found me near the window and told me the development proposal was solid and he was excited to talk it through. I told him I was glad he had come. I told him to stay close because I wanted to include him in what I was about to share with the room. When I called for attention, the conversation settled quickly, the way they do among professionals who understand that the host has something worth hearing. I thanked everyone for their work, their partnership, their investment in what the studio had become. I said I wanted to share something that had taught me a great deal about what it means to protect what you build. Then I nodded to Donna, who was standing at the laptop near the display wall, and the screen behind me changed. Patricia's documentation does not look dramatic. It is clean columns and transaction records and IP logs and account registration details. But in a room full of people who understand business, it reads immediately and without ambiguity. I walked through it in 4 minutes. I named the vendor accounts. I named the IP addresses. I showed the transfer chain. I showed where the money had landed. I did not say Marcus's name. I did not need to. He was standing 12 feet away from the screen, holding a folder in a room full of people who were now looking at documentation that ended with a holding company registered in his name. The room was very quiet. Marcus said my name once, sharply, and then stopped. I watched him calculate in real time that there was no version of the next 30 seconds that helped him. Bree had gone still beside him. I watched Marcus look at the room, at the screen, at me, and then he set the folder down on the table nearest to him with a care that seemed in that moment like the only thing he could control. And he walked toward the exit without saying anything else. Bree followed without looking at me. The silence held for a few seconds after they left. Then one of my contractor partners said something quiet to the person next to him, and the room slowly resumed, the way rooms do when the thing that needed to happen has happened. Donna brought me a glass of water without being asked. That is the kind of colleague worth keeping. Within the week, my attorney had filed the civil complaint. The documentation Patricia had assembled was thorough enough that Marcus's attorney advised him, I was told later, not to contest the core findings. The legal resolution took 5 months. The studio recovered the majority of the funds. Marcus was removed permanently from any role, formal or informal. in my professional life. A restraining order covered communications as well. After a period of escalating messages that I did not respond to, and my attorney handled instead, my grandmother called me when the family found out. She was upset in the way people are when they have loved two people and are being asked to understand that one of them had harmed the other. I did not ask her to choose anything. I told her I loved her and that I hoped she would come to see me when she felt ready. She came 2 weeks later and we had lunch and did not talk about Marcus at all. Which felt, to both of us, I think, like the right decision. My cousin Bree sent a single message 4 months after the event. She said she had told her own attorney everything she knew. I did not respond, but I noted it. There is something I did for myself that fall. I rented a small workspace in a building 3 miles from my main studio. A single room with good light and a drafting table and no history attached to it. I go there on Saturday mornings to work on the projects I find most interesting, the ones that are still exploratory, not yet ready for a client presentation. No one I have not chosen knows the address. I make coffee and I work and the room is quiet in a way that feels, every single time I unlock the door, like something I built entirely for myself. I have thought a lot, in the months since, about the shape of what happened. Not the legal part, which resolved the way it needed to, but the earlier part. The years in which I had included Marcus in my professional calendar, shared my system credentials with him, described him in conversation as one of the people I trusted. I was not naive in any general sense. I was naive specifically about him, in the way you are naive about people whose early claim on your loyalty was established before you had any information to evaluate it with. He was my brother before I was old enough to know what kind of person he was. The people who take from you are not always strangers calculating from a distance. Sometimes they are people who watched you build something from the beginning and who made a quiet decision, somewhere along the way, that your effort was a resource they were entitled to draw from. The theft, in my case, was financial, and it had a legal remedy. But what it pointed to had been there much longer than the 7 months of false invoices. It had been there in the dinner I was not invited to. In the way my success was never quite celebrated, only referenced. In the comfort with which Marcus had said in that private dining room that this was how family was supposed to take care of family, while my name was the thing they were taking care not to include. I am not angry about it now, or not primarily. What I feel is closer to clarity. There is a specific kind of freedom that comes from knowing precisely who someone is after a long time of hoping they were something different. It is not a comfortable freedom, but it is real, and it is yours, and no one can invoice you for it. If you have ever built something with your own hands and discovered that someone close to you was treating it as their own resource, I want to ask you something. Not about what they did, about what you did next. What was the moment you stopped negotiating with the version of them you had wanted to believe in and started dealing with the version that was actually there?